So today I will be talking about form validation. I guess speaking in English will be fine for you. Most of you know English already. Yeah, we'll talk about validation without any plugins, and then with plugins. So a few words about me. Yeah, okay. So I'm Dobromir Hristov. I'm a lead front-end developer at HiveFactors. I have more than 3 years of Vue experience in my career, professionally. And I'm also part of the Vue Bulgaria team. Some of you may know me from Saturday, where we had the first workshop for Vue in Bulgaria, which actually turned out pretty well, if I do say so myself. I'm here with a few of my colleagues, Nedialko, Elena, and Chris, who helped me a lot with the whole workshop. And yeah, so the agenda for today, we'll be talking about validation with Vue without any plugins. Then we will see how to actually use a plugin called Vuelidate. Some of you may know it already, so if you do, I'm sorry, it's going to be probably boring for you. We'll look at custom Vuelidate validators, how you can create your own, how you can actually manage large forms, because we all have had big forms. How to show messages per error, per field, which is a UX kind of thing. And later, at the end, I'll show you a plugin called Vuelidate Error Extractor, which I built because I actually saw a nasty thing that I really didn't like about how Vuelidate works in general. Cool, so validation without any plugins, as you all know, we have essentially two types of validation. We have server and we have the client side. And I am pretty sure most of you don't even do client-side validation. You just pretty much leave it to a Laravel or whatever API you have in the backend, and it just serves you something. And yeah, that's okay, but UX-wise, not the greatest thing in the world. And I truly think that we should have both. And with Vue, it's actually pretty simple. Okay, live demo. So essentially, if the code sandbox actually builds, it'll be cool. Anyway, cool. So we have a form. This is the almightiest of forms. You have a name and an email. So validation, what should do? It should just, when you submit, it should show you some feedback. Whoa, okay. And yeah, pretty much if your name is invalid or your email is invalid, it should give you some feedback. And once you start typing, it should go away. Same for email. So if you have any valid email, I'm sure you're very interested in seeing this. Cool. So yeah, pretty much this is, everyone has seen such validation. How could we implement it with Vue? Well, for the most part, you just need a form object. You need to define your field, the fields you're actually tracking, which for our case is name and email. Dirty field, so you don't show the errors immediately. And then we can have three computed properties. One is just that has errors, which, as you may or may not know, computed properties recompute and return new data every time their dependencies change. So the has errors will return a Boolean whether is name valid or is email valid is true or false. And if we look at both of those computed properties, what they do is essentially they just pretty much check if each of the fields is there, because we want them to be required, and for the name, if it's the minimum of 10 symbols. And both required and min are functions that I actually had to write on my own, because you don't have them in Vue out of the box. So I just extracted them outside and made them so they're actually reusable. As you can see, I'm actually reusing the required one on the email. And for the most part, when you submit, you just check if has errors is true, and you set your dirty Boolean to true. And yeah, if it's valid, I guess you just do your thing. If not, you just return and force the user to update. So yeah, on the template side, you just check if the is name valid is false, and you check the dirty and yada yada yada. You know, super boring. So, what's the outcome? Yeah, so the pros, it's super simple for small forms. You just have like a few computed properties and you're done. Computed properties auto-compute on the fly every time, so you don't have to worry about that thing. And you can extract your common validators. The cons though, you need to define your computed properties for every single field you are trying to track. You need to update on multiple places your has errors, you need to update on the templates. It's a lot of updating, which you need to keep track of your dirty fields on your own. If you need to track for each individual field, that's pain. A lot of extra boilerplate. And everything is super error prone. I mean, it's fine, but meh, no. Okay, so let's look at how Vuelidate actually can help you remove a lot of that boilerplate. Oops, not this one. So for the most part, Vuelidate is actually a data model-oriented validator. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you have used, which use Vue, have used vue-validate, right? How many of you have used vue-validate? Well, that's so many, like 4 people. Okay. How many of you have used Vuelidate? Same number. Okay, fine. So data model-oriented means that your rules actually pretty much resemble, or if not look the same as your data structure. Whereas the other kind, where vue-validate uses, it uses inline directives on each individual input, which you can imagine the bigger your forms gets, you have to dig and dig and dig into that template to find your rules, which is, for me, is just not okay. The data model-oriented one is easy to understand because it looks almost the same as your data. Vuelidate actually allows you to have dynamic rule sets, which means you can change your rules depending on certain criteria that you have. It allows for asynchronous rules, so you can do API fetches and checks if your email is free or the name is free or whatever. It auto-tracks dirty fields for you, so you don't have to do it on your own. And it has a lot of pre-built validators out of the box. So how does it look like? Well, you just import the validations that you need. We define our data as we used to do before, but then we have our validations. And as you can see, the form actually looks pretty much the same. We have the name and the email, but this time we only define what we're actually validating against. So the name should be required, the email as well, and we just want to know if the email is a proper email. And both of these are actually shipping with Vuelidate out of the box. Oops. No. Okay, this is the form, I hope. Okay, so how does it look like? Well, same as before. If we submit, if it's less than 10 characters, it errors out. If it's more, it's fine. Same with the email. If it's a proper email, well, that might not be a proper one. It should, yeah, be green. Yeah, cool. So works the same way as before. So what's the outcome? We have less boilerplate, we have less repetition, we have less developer errors because you don't have to define all of these things on your own, and you have the automatic dirty field tracking. Nice. Okay, so yeah, what about custom ones? Let's say you really need to track some very specific rule that Vuelidate doesn't have. What do you do? Well, for starters, they have a lot. And these are not all of them. This is like a chunk of them. And from just looking at them, these are probably most that you'll be needing anyway. Although, if you really need something specific, custom validators are just functions that should return either a Boolean or a promise resolving a Boolean. And they receive the value of the field that you're trying to validate now. And as a second param, they receive the whole component context. So you have your data, you have your computed properties, you have your methods, you have everything. So let's see how we can actually define custom validators. So let's say we want to know if the value is not Joe. Well, we just have value and we check if it includes the word Joe. And if it does, then that's an error and we just return a false. Same for is not Gmail. If the email that you have includes the word Gmail in it, then we return an error. You can even have some fancier stuff like this amazing regex that I have, which just checks if your value has any of the character list forbidden illegal characters. Usage is very straightforward. You just import them and you define them in your validations, same as you do with the inbuilt ones. And let's see actually if there's any change in what we had before. So name should not be Joe. What happens if it's Joe? Yeah, should not be Joe. If it's Joe, it errors out. If it's not, then it's fine. Yeah, so our relations work, and the email should be at least 10 characters for this one. And yeah, it works. But what if we have Gmail? Yeah, no, not Gmail. Well, it should be gmail.com, but as you saw, our rule was not perfect, so. Cool. What about large forms? So probably most of you have had like big forms that are like huge with a lot of fields, and they just get humongous and very hard to maintain. So a common approach is to split your logical parts into subcomponents. So you can have a email component, you can have a name component, you can have a cart, I guess, a product, whatever. And you keep all your form data on the parent. So all of the data actually gets passed to all of the children that actually require it. And you only pass the data to the child that actually needs. You shouldn't really pass the whole form. Then you just emit changes to the parent. You shouldn't, and I'm like very strict about it. You shouldn't mutate data on the children itself, because then things get very hairy. And yeah, so then the parent just has to pass the valid data down to the child, so the child actually knows if the data in the parent is actually wrong. And only the parent is responsible for submitting the form to the server. An example child implementation is, let's say we have a complicated email field, like very complicated. And what we do is we can use the $error, which is the validator that we're passing, and we're checking if the error is true. So we can apply on a has-error class. And the other thing, the rest of it is just our plain boilerplate that we had on the email, with the exception that now we're remodeling a computed property. And on the right, we actually have the script for the component, and we have a value, which is a string. We have a v, which is our validator prop, and we have a computer with a getter and a setter. I like to use this because it actually makes my component a lot smaller when I work with child components, and I can actually leverage vmodel. So defining a getter and a setter, we essentially say, yeah, the email will get this value as its value, and every time we try to set the value, we touch the validator, which means we say it now it's dirty, so it should show if there's an error, and we emit an input event with the new value that we had, so the parent can actually handle it. And using this child is pretty straightforward. We just have the component itself, vmodel, the data that we're changing, and we pass the the current validator as a prop. And as you can see, this is actually very descriptive. We exactly know what this component is, what it does, just by the name. Yeah, but what about error message display? We need to show the user some more errors. We can't just like have it read and nothing. It could be like 50,000 things. So the good thing about this kind of thing is it's very good for the UX, because the user can actually instantly know what's wrong. They get immediate feedback. So how something like this should look like: if we submit the form, we immediately know that the name is required and the email is required. So if we start typing, it tells us, yeah, the name must be Joe. So in this case, we actually have to have a name that's Joe. So if we go Joe, yeah, so now we don't have any errors. Same for the email. We need to have a valid email. Some valid email. Yeah, so now no errors. User knows everything is fine. They can submit the form and everything is peachy. But how do you actually extract the errors from Vuelidate? So that monstrosity over there means that you have to check each individual validation rule. You have to have text for each rule. This is super repetitive. This is very error prone. It's time consuming. It's a lot of boilerplate. It noises up all of your templates. And I had to do that every time I had a field. I couldn't stand it. So what I did, I just built a library, which is called Vuelidate Error Extractor, which does this for you. And you might be thinking that's the worst name in the world, and I can absolutely agree. I have no idea why I named it like that, and it's awful, and people cannot remember it like at all. No, I'm dead serious. Like, I should have named it something else. Vuelidate errors or Vuelidate messages or something. Okay, so same thing as before. Currently, though, we'll be using Foundation 6 as a CSS framework because I just like Foundation. And same as before, if we start typing, the field tells us immediately what's wrong. We have a message. The name is required. The name should be Joe. Same as before. Absolutely same as before. I'm not going to type an email again. We even have a summary of errors on the top. So how do you actually use this? Well, before, remember, we had to define all of those errors, check against each one. It was super, super annoying. Well, now you just wrap your input in a form group. That's it. You just pass it the validator. Nothing else. Absolutely. Like, look at how much boilerplate you're saving. You don't have to assign classes. You don't have to add labels. You don't have to check for errors. Nothing. And the installation is super straightforward. You just pull it in. You tell it if you want to have internationalization. We support Vue E18N. And you just define a set of common messages that you have. Because yeah, like 99% of the time, once you define those common ones, like required, minimum length, yada yada, email is not valid, they will be the same for all of your errors and all of your fields. And at the end, you just have to register your form group component. And you can use actually one of the pre-built ones. Let's say I'm using the Foundation one that the library ships with. So what are the pros? Well, we have templates for Foundation, for Bootstrap 3 and 4. We you can predefine your common reusable error messages as you saw, so you don't have to write them out every time. And you're consistent. Vue E18N, which is a killer because you don't have to do the whole dollar and like the full name of the error message. It removes all the repetitive work. As you saw, you don't have to define all the errors all the time. It extracts all the errors for you. It obeys the dirty rule check automatically. It knows. It's very simple to use. And it's super extendable because actually it's just a mixin, so you can mix it in your component and just extend it. I'm going. What about custom error components? Let's say you have your own special component using some special in-house CSS library that we just don't support because we can't. Well, you just pretty much define your own. You can use the one of the has errors or the is valid computed properties that we ship with. And you just have a slot. And you can then just loop the active error messages computed property, which is just a simple array of errors. And you just display them. And yeah, you just have to import the single error extractor and mix it in, just mix it in. That's it, nothing else, nothing more super complicated. And we have actually a few available properties that you can use. Just you can use active errors. You can have the active error messages, which is the messages extracted. You can have the merged messages, which actually allows you to override messages per field. So if your required is messages like something like your field should be required, but on this specific field you need something more explanatory, like the field that you're trying to use is not blah 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 or something, you can actually override them inline. Same for let's say you can have your first error, last error, has errors, a lot more. There are very a lot more. So what about other UI frameworks? A lot of you may be using Element UI, iVue, all of these. Well, there are examples for each individual one in the docs, so you can actually use it with all of them very easily. But there's more. Billy Mays, if you don't know who he is, our Teleshop stuff. So sometimes you just need to have a summary error component, which stays on the top, and once you submit a form, it just tells you you have all of these errors, or you do a pop-up or something. Oh yeah, so there's actually an example. Yeah, live transpiling with Webpack. Takes time. Cool. We submit, and we can see actually all the errors on the top. Once we start actually typing, because it's reactive and it's connected, those actually change on the fly with the phone. And because we use actually, I think this is with the foundation again, we can even have coloring for success and stuff. Cool. So how do you actually use the form summary? We just define a form summary component and you pass it the validator. That's it. It's super extendable. It can work with like very deeply nested validators. It auto assigns the field names, so it knows if it's a name, if it's email, if it's any else that you can think of as a field. It works with each, so you can have collections of validations. It also has Bootstrap and Foundation templates included as well. Yeah, and that's it. Yeah, you can find more about me on these places. So I actually write articles on Medium. I'm very active on GitHub, Twitter. Yeah, my GitHub is semi-active. I try to contribute as much as I can. And you can find me actually on Discord as Dobromir Hristov. So I'm pretty much always there, trying to help people out as much as I can. Thanks.
Thank you, Dobry. The question is, do you support asynchronous configuration of error messages? So, I mean, I switch the language or the things change and I need to pull the translations. So will it reflect asynchronously?
Yeah, sure. So if you're using Vue E18N, because everything is technically a computed property, all of this will change on the fly. The question is that you will have to fetch your error messages asynchronously yourself, because it's the part of the Vue. Yeah, everything will be updated automatically, yeah, because everything is computed properties.